Hello, and welcome back to another webinar day with Charity Digital. To those of you who've joined us before, it's great to have you back. And to our first-time listeners, we hope today's session will be the first of many with the Charity Digital community. For our newcomers, here's a quick update of who we are and what we do. Charity Digital is a charity that helps organisations grow their impact using digital technology. And we do this through a number of services. Our first one is Charity Digital News, which is a media platform where organisations can access the latest digital news, insights and resources. Secondly is the Charity Digital Exchange, which is the UK's only discounted and donated technology platform, which has saved charities almost £240 million in software and hardware costs. Next up is our Charity Digital Jobs Board, which, as I rightly said, is a jobs board that connects charities to the best digital recruits looking for their next role. We also have Charity Digital Mail, which is our white labeled email marketing platform that combats the pain points of platforms like MailChimp and others. And finally, we have our Charity Digital Payment Solution, which is a tailored payments and payment processing solution for charities. Today's webinar focuses on the HMRC's Making Tax Digital initiative, an initiative that requires all charities to submit their tax returns and payments through compliance software by October 1st, 2019. As a charity ourselves, we understand the pain points of going through mandatory digital transformation. So we're delighted to bring Kamlesh and Stefan from finance software gurus Oracle NetSuite and Alex from tax experts Grant Thornton to share how your charity can take the first steps to become compliant under the brand new Making Tax Digital initiative. As always, before we get started, a few housekeeping rules. A little reminder that we will be hosting a Q&A session at the end of the webinar, so make sure you do stick around for that. If you want to ask a question, you can do so at any time throughout the webinar by hitting the Q&A button, which is bottom center of your screen. If we happen to run out of time before your question gets asked, don't worry, we'll hang around afterwards and record the answers once we wrap up. And we'll include them in our email afterwards, which will have the recording and any resources we discussed today. And we typically send that out within a week or so of today. That's enough for me now. I'd love to hand over to Kamlesh, Alex, and Stefan. Welcome to you all, and thanks for joining us today.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for joining. Just a quick introduction to the three of us here. So I'm Kamlesh Rajakaru, Director for International Product at NetSuite Oracle, and I'm responsible basically for the global tax functionality within the NetSuite Oracle products.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alex Wolf. I'm a director with Grant Thornton in London. I lead our VAT technology advisory team, advising businesses and charities on wider digitalization, systems, process, and data.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Stefan, and I'm part of the social impact team at Oracle NetSuite.
Okay, so here we go. The first thing is, well, there's a lot of new terminology that many of you will not be familiar with, and certainly even businesses outside the charity arena are not familiar with. So, for example, the term digital. What is making tax digital? That's something that a lot of businesses have a problem trying to understand. Really, it's all about electronic and digital format record keeping. In other words, the books that you have today might be on paper. The submissions that you do might be previously with the VAT 100, which was on green paper, and in the last few years, which has been on the HMRC website. That's all moving. It's now going to be electronic. So it's all about moving away from paper record keeping. This means that you would need either a software program, or it could be something that you have internally had some people develop for you, or it could be applications that you just buy off the shelf in shops, etc. In other words, everything that is now available by way of a software program. The other term that you will see increasingly coming in is no manual or human intervention. In other words, you can't just go and tap some numbers in any form, but it has to be digitally linked, i.e. it should be always by way of formula from one product or another, or all the records held in a particular software. So historically, if you have used Excel and cut and paste numbers onto the VAT 100, that will no longer be acceptable to HMRC. And the last point on this particular slide is about importing data. So let's say about CSV or Excel, you could have data that is in different spreadsheets, and then you bring it into another master spreadsheet. That import you can still do, provided you show formulas or links. In other words, where is the value coming from on the spreadsheets? Why is all this about tax, making tax digital coming into play? Well, let's look at the long-term thing. Really, it's all about HMRC ensuring that all taxpayers, including charities, are right up to date with the payments or repayments that are due back from them, rather than building up. Because a lot of charities, some might do the monthly returns, some might do quarterly, some might do them annually. But really, it's all about amounts building up as far as HMRC are concerned. So this is now a way of ensuring that they have a record and payments are made on a regular basis rather than building up. The other area is that by next year, they're trying to ensure that they have a complete picture of everybody's digital accounts, so whether that be charities, small businesses, etc. What this is leading to longer term is very simple, and that is whether you're a charity doing VAT returns or whether you're a charity having your bookkeeping, they want a complete record of all your income as well as expenditure details on a frequent basis rather than on a quarterly or annual basis. That's the important point here to note longer term. You'll be inevitably asked to submit everything on a more frequent basis. And it's all about bringing the tax system forward into the 21st century. Here's a quote from HMRC themselves, right? They're trying to streamline everything, ensuring that people move away from paper onto computerized systems.
And Kamlesh, I'd just add that, this is HMRC going through a transformation themselves. They are upskilling themselves in terms of digital skills, in terms of software that they use, and they're preparing to, receive additional data from taxpayers. And of course, VAT is the pilot tax, the first to go live under Making Tax Digital. And hopefully HMRC will learn lessons and get feedback from the experiences of different taxpayers.
And that's an important point you made about it being a pilot, because this actually was in a pilot stage with non-charities as of October last year. So between October last year and April this year, that's been under the pilot. They actually invited some organizations to register for it and test it so that they got feedback and learned from it as well. So that's an important point. It's a two-way process. It's not all about them dictating what's required and expecting charities to basically submit returns on that basis. So let's talk about the timelines now. And how they apply to charities in particular. So the first one, I guess, is really what this is all about. Charities did have a deferral period, and really, whilst most businesses had April 2019, charities had a deferral, 6-month deferral period, i.e. 1st of October, before you are required to be MTD compliant and submit those returns using MTD HMRC compatible software. All right, that's the most important thing. It has to be compatible software that HMRC have reviewed and said, yep, we recognize that software is compatible. The second bullet about it being deferred, to March 2020 to 29, September 2020, is that there's basically going to be a soft lending period. In other words, between October 2019 and September 2020, they won't be necessarily imposing any financial penalties. Yeah, they'll take a soft view because this is a learning period, as we just referred to, for everybody. But post September 2020, they'll expect all charities to conform and get the data right and hold them in a digital format. And bear in mind, for those of you who have payroll or maybe some sort of corporation tax requirements, beyond 2020, that too is going to come into enforcement as far as MTD is concerned. Tax complexity actually is increasing for every business as well as individuals as well. You know, we do our self-assessment returns. We've historically done them on paper with the self-assessment, and businesses have done the VAT returns on paper too. But as we've all seen, that's going away. We do our income tax returns online now. That is a necessary tool. For VAT, certainly a lot of time is spent by smaller businesses in particular, assessing that 64% of those who've been surveyed say that it takes a significant amount of time. That in conjunction with PAYE, i.e. the national insurance and income tax, takes a significant compliance burden for companies and smaller charities in particular. MTD is just going to add to that, I'm afraid. It's no getting away from that. Alex, do you want to just talk briefly about the deferral period and how that applies to charities in particular?
So, Kamlesh talked about, the two main requirements under Making Tax Digital. The first being to submit the VAT return via an API link to HMRC, so no longer being able to physically type in the 9-box VAT return online. That was applicable to most businesses from VAT period starting from the 1st of April this year. However, HMRC provided an additional 6-month deferral period for certain categories of taxpayer, which many charities fall into. But I suppose I make the point there's no special blanket exemption for charities. It's only if you meet one of these criteria. So not-for-profit organizations not set up as a company, trusts, if you are in a VAT group, so multiple registrations under one single VAT registration, that's quite common in the charity sector where you have a trading subsidiary and that's grouped with the main charity. Also, some government departments and in the public sector are also part of this deferral, as well as any business or charity that's based overseas. If you make payments on account or use an annual accounting scheme, you're also part of this deferral. But a key thing to remember is you should have already received a letter from HMRC officially confirming this deferral. If you believe you should be deferred and you haven't received this letter, my advice would be to contact HMRC, pick up the phone, talk to them on the helpline, confirm the deferral applies, and if it does, to request a copy of that formal notification.
So there might be smaller charities that might just have 2 or 3 people helping out, some of them possibly part-time. Is there any possibility they can ring on HMRC and seek an extension, for example, if the timelines are tight for them and they don't have the resources to deal with it?
Officially, there's no formal deferral. What we are seeing is HMRC are extremely busy at the moment. And in fact, last month, ahead of the VAT return filing deadline, there was actually a recorded message on the helpline saying, if you haven't tried to switch over to Making Tax Digital yet, don't do it for this period. There's not enough time to get businesses and charities successfully transferred. But I would suggest that if you do have a VAT return deadline approaching, that you ensure you are firstly able to transfer over to MTD via HMRC's website, and then you have the software that's set up to submit.
Okay. So let's look at the challenges that charities are likely to be facing. Some of you may have already been through that internally amongst your teams. First and foremost is the terminology. right? So as we said, not everybody is an expert in, IT or necessarily tax for that matter. So it's understanding the terminology that HMRC uses or even software uses. So that's one of the key things. The other one is there's obviously going to be a cost attachment to it too. It's not just cost in terms of computerization, but it's also cost in terms of training too. Now, is there any training that HMRC have made available, perhaps on the website, anywhere else that someone perhaps not familiar with this at all can go to?
So HMRC have published guidance on making tax digital, giving examples of the requirements. They've published a list of approved software that businesses and charities can use. HMRC made the decision that they wouldn't be issuing their own free software for the public. They say it's up to third-party software companies to develop that software. But I think now there are, between 200 and 300 different software providers who have created different submission tools of different complexity for different sized businesses and charities. And of course, there are different price points there. I think there are some which may be available for free or a very low cost entry. Obviously, some are a bit more sophisticated in terms of the functionality, and there's a wider cost there.
And also, from an organizational point, they might be doing everything on paper today, right? And it works fine, no problem, particularly if you just have few part-time people helping out in your charitable shops, etc. Now, of course, it's not just that, not just the training itself and learning technology, but changing culture too, new practices.
Completely. And, from, talking with a lot of charities and smaller businesses out there, a lot of the change in terms of making tax digital is to existing processes and procedures. And as you correctly point out, that may involve a change in culture. A lot of people think, possibly due to lots of the television adverts, that you are required to have scanned copies of invoices. I suppose there's a bit of confusion there when we talk about digitalization. HMRC have said it's still okay to hold paper copies of invoices, but the key thing is the data that you capture. That needs to be granular, it needs to meet the VAT record keeping requirements. And then next year, when we have the digital link requirements, all of those records and data needs to be linked all the way through to the submission process to HMRC.
Yeah, so that comes back to the point made earlier about ensuring that the links are there for a clear audit trail, so to speak. And so long as you can also demonstrate in the event of an audit that, yes, this would where that scanned copy comes from, that's the key. So talking about record keeping, a number of you may well be aware of the various rates that apply, but nonetheless, we decided here to take the opportunity to just underline some of the things which Alex can explain to you here.
So actually, these record keeping requirements are not completely new. They've actually been a requirement under existing VAT legislation for a number of decades. It's also worth pointing out that HMRC won't require you to physically submit this information to them at the moment, but they are required to keep this in accounts. So in terms of all sales or your outputs, you're required to have a split between all the different liabilities: standard, zero, reduced, exempt, outside the scope. If there are any adjustments made, credit notes, debit notes, any other adjustments to the VAT position, payable or recoverable, that needs to be clearly set out. And the same applies on the purchase side too. When invoices are received, it's no longer acceptable now just to simply record the VAT amount. You need to capture more data. The time of supply, which is generally that invoice date, as well as the total amount of VAT that will be recovered.
Yes, and when we talk about terminology, if you see something like supply or time of supply, it's really referring to the date, for example, and it's really saying the sale. So just bear that in mind when you see supply. We're really talking about sales and purchases, but this is just the terminology that typically HMRC would use or any business would use for VAT purposes. So let's talk further about, well, what does a mandatory digital link mean in terms of timing, etc.?
Okay, so if there is a deferral, it's deferred to the 1st of October 2020. If you fall out of that deferral regime, it's actually from April next year. And I think the main thing on digital links is that you can't copy and paste. Cut and paste or copy and paste, strictly forbidden and specifically forbidden under HMRC guidance and the new legislation. In effect, there needs to be more automation within the VAT accounting process, and HMRC will expect all of those digital records to be linked. Where there's an adjustment made, that needs to be clearly shown. And I think the ultimate aim is to avoid having to make adjustments at the end. An example of this may be the reverse charge, where VAT is actually self-assessed on invoices from outside of the UK. A lot of businesses and charities may do this manually as a final step before they prepare the VAT return.
So on the reverse charge, that's a term that I know certainly from our own experience, a lot of accountants struggle to understand. Do charities actually even incur reverse charge liabilities?
So where services are received from outside of the UK, to level the playing field, to put everyone in the same VAT position, the recipient is required to self-assess VAT. That's reported in the VAT return. And then if there is an available credit, so if you are able to recover that VAT, you'd also take a credit in your return.
Okay, so just to underline, it's definitely not something that every person will understand. Even in large corporations, people struggle with this reverse charge mechanism because it turns out to be largely a reporting requirement, but something you may want to actually go out and study online to see exactly what it means for your particular charity.
And particularly with many charities not being able to recover all of the VAT that they incur, the reverse charge can have a material effect. So it's important that any system changes set up to automate this for making tax digital, are tested to make sure you're getting the right results.
Mm-hmm. And the accountants in the audience would obviously know about accruals, but can you perhaps give some examples of partial exemptions that may apply, such as
most charities will have exempt revenue streams. So where they calculate the net amount of VAT they can recover, their overall partial exemption position, HMRC has said this can take place outside of the accounting system. It can still be a separate calculation and in effect a manual adjustment in the VAT return. This is the same for business and non-business calculations, where charities have non-business revenue. Similarly, if there's any capital goods schemes adjustments linked to partial exemption, that again is an allowable adjustment outside of the digital links.
And petty cash, of course, is going to be key to all charities too, right? Okay, so let's now talk about the MTD journey, how your charity needs to prepare for these changes if you haven't already started to do so, and where it will lead to in terms of the next steps.
So in terms of the requirements, the API submission requirements which is the immediate one, that can be seen as a standalone requirement. There are easy Excel bolt-ons, so you can submit a VAT return direct from Excel. Many of the accounting software providers have added that functionality within their solution, so the VAT return may be able to be submitted from there. But in terms of assessing whether you meet the digital record keeping requirements and also the digital link requirements, really that's on a case-by-case basis. So, what you can see on the screen now is a kind of methodology, a journey that quite a few charities and businesses are going on now. Really documenting the current systems and processes, what adjustments are you making and why. Carrying out a gap analysis of the current state and where you need to get to under Making Tax Digital. Something to consider there is the quality of the data that you currently have, maybe the data that you're currently inputting into your accounts. Does it meet the record keeping requirements? Does it also allow you to make a tax decision for VAT in terms of the liability and the recoverability? And then, once you realize the change that's required, it's time to actually decide how you bridge those gaps. Is it a simple change in process? Is it a case of changing a policy in terms of what data's obtained? Or is it actually something a bit wider? Do we need to make changes to our technology, either upgrades, patches, or is it a chance to do a wider finance transformation? And of course, with any technology project or any change, as well as implementing that change, you need to test it. And so, if you're planning for the year ahead, not only in terms of budgeting, but also any IT support that you may require, do factor in that additional testing time.
And of course, this doesn't mean that you have to be ready by October necessarily. You need to get underway by October or the first time that you need to do your return, but make sure that by September next year, everything is in place. So you have, 12 to 14 month window in which to get everything ready in time for the time that HMRC will take a tougher view on the returns.
So what have we been hearing from charities in relation to Making Tax Digital? There are lots of concerns around the impact on charities in terms of additional resources, cost, and the time it may take. A lot of people have said to me, they're looking at these requirements individually. So the first requirement about the API submission, actually they're saying, let's keep the same process. We currently use Excel. So as a short-term and cost-effective solution, we're going to just procure a simple Excel add-in that enables the return to be submitted, the 9-box VAT return to be filed via API direct to HMRC.
So that's really an assurance for the smaller ones in particular that might have some budgetary issues, for example, that initially you can still continue to use Excel for making compliance. And
I'd actually say it's not just smaller charities. Actually, the larger the charity, the more complexity in the VAT return, and that might be the driver why people are actually using Excel, because there's a lot of data consolidation. At the moment, there's a lot of manual adjustments. So really, this Excel bolt-on is just one extra final step and allows the existing process to remain in place.
Yeah, and actually just to add to that, if you're using Excel, don't ever feel that actually we're the only ones using it. Far from it. We've seen even multinationals using Excel when it comes to tax returns or VAT returns, etc., due to complexity. So it can vary from small to large organizations still using Excel for one reason or another.
Some charities are also saying they're using MTD as the kind of catalyst for wider finance transformation. maybe accelerating an existing plan or roadmap. So maybe looking to a more digitalized solution, possibly in the cloud. And we're also then seeing people talk about replacing some manual processes. Maybe there are things like cash books used. It may be that the records kept, albeit already in digital records, aren't really granular enough. They're not capturing, all the VAT details on a tax invoice. But it's not just around the technology side. Don't forget about your people. Part of making tax digital change, maybe on the people side too. It might be around training, guidance, process notes, just providing a bit of extra guidance on getting the correct coding when an invoice comes in.
Okay, so with that, let's look to see, when it comes to the software selection, how do you go about that? So the first point that we would make is go to the HMRC site. It has a full list of the over 250 software that they have looked at and approved. And I would say this is sort of approved or recognized. There's no such thing as a certification. But have a look at that. You can have a look at it to see what type of businesses you are, which software is available, which one is suitable from you. There's really a wide range, some that provide financial software, some that just do the filing, etc. So do go to that, have a look at it, see which is most suitable for you. And then whilst you're doing that, also have a look to see what do they offer in addition. It's not just about submission, but if you need to make adjustments, do they allow you to adjust it and submit, for example, via Excel or CSV? And adjustments are necessary, as we discussed earlier, because it could be that you have bad debts, or you could have some adjustments perhaps for partial exemptions, as we mentioned earlier on. Or it could be that you have, multiple areas, or you could have multiple shops which have different registrations. You want to consolidate all that in Excel, etc. So look at that too. And it's possible that, some of the charities out there may have group registration. So look for all those particular aspects of it and look for what is most suitable longer term too. Once you've got the software, there are a number of things that you need to do. First and foremost, you need to sign up with HMRC for MTD submissions. Yes, today you have a user ID, you have a password if you're submitting VAT returns online, but that itself is not sufficient and it's not going to be valid for MTD. Essentially, what HMRC have to do is move your records from, if you like, an old system to the new MTD system on their side too, which is why they require you to actually apply for it, and then they will actually grant you a new user ID and password. You'll see on the website, it says that it takes 3 to 4 days for them to submit the information back to you in terms of your ID and password. But currently it's taking approximately 7 working days. So do bear that in mind. It's not a long time frame, but you have to bear that in mind. The other point to make is don't apply for MTD submission until you have completed your last VAT return based on the current method. And if you want to have an idea as to when that would be, when your next or your first MTD return is going to be, the table here indicates that based on the quarter that your VAT return ends. So for example, if your quarterly return is end of September, your first MTD submission will be in December. So by the end of this year. So there's still plenty of time once you have submitted your September return to then apply for MTD and then prepare for it. Okay. So based on this time frame, none of you will need to submit the first return much before December. So there is time, but make sure you don't lose the bandwidth between now and then to prepare for it.
I suppose unless you are submitting on a monthly basis, so you have 1 month and 7 days after the period ends. So it's worth making sure that's correct. And secondly, I'd also wait until your direct debit payment's been made. My understanding is the new direct debit processes linked to the new MTD account, and therefore, if you transfer to making tax digital with HMRC before that payment's due, it could cause the payment to fail.
Okay, so the sign-up steps are fairly simple. If you go to the HMRC website, the first question they'll ask you is, do you have accounting software? Really, this is for them to confirm that you are moving away from paper. Then the next step is, yes or no for you to confirm whether you have any or not. And then the final step is actually signing in using the government gateway. Very, very simple steps, not complicated at all. In terms of software, again, just to emphasize on the point that you can only use software that is listed on the HMRC site. You can't go and purchase or invest in anything that is not on that list. So have a look to see, how easy is it to use, how much of it is automated. Again, depending on the internal skill set that you have, how much of it comes pre-configured for you, so you don't have to spend time and perhaps outside consultants, etc. And does it allow for adjustments and so on. When considering the software, look at other areas too. So, are you going to buy something that you just install on your PC? Are you going to look at cloud software? Now, the advantages of cloud software are very simple in that you can actually submit directly from it. Should there be any changes in legislation, those are actually done for you automatically and pushed to you. So consider those points as well. How easy is it to put your user ID and password in the software, etc. On the right-hand side, here's just some examples of basically a checkbox which says, yes, you are going to submit using MTD. So these are just simple examples to look for when you're considering software. I've highlighted here the VAT return as it currently stands, but as you can see on the left in the blue box, it shows, you can submit directly, you can retrieve previously submitted returns again from the same page, so you're not moving to different pages within a software or a web page, and you have the additional option to export it into Excel, etc. So these are just some hints at areas that you should be considering when you look at software.
Kamlesh, I'd just say, I'm getting quite a lot of feedback from taxpayers saying they haven't received confirmation of a filing from HMRC. That should come from your software. So the API, you submit the 9 boxes, it actually works 2 ways. So HMRC sends the confirmation of receipt and a filing reference number back to the software, and most software providers have then created an automated service where that will be emailed to you, maybe in a PDF. So something to check when you're selecting a solution, and then I recommend that you file that.
And the other one is to ensure that the software prevents you from sending the same submission again too. Okay, so how would you practically actually submit your return? So with this, once you have the software, you go in and the software will then redirect you to the HMRC website, okay? It's not done in the software directly, it'll always direct you to the HMRC website. In other words, that's where this digital link or the API comes in. You enter in your unique user ID and password that the HMRC issues to you. And then there's a secondary page just to confirm that yes, you as a charity are going to grant authority for the HMRC website to talk to the software. This is important. They're not just going to take your data until you say, yes, it's fine for the 2 systems to talk to each other. And as the point that Alex made is what happens once you have submitted it. In this particular example, I've shown one particular cloud software that says, yes, you get an email back to the user saying you have successfully submitted it. Of course, if there's an error and the submission isn't made, you'll get a similar message as well. But in this particular example, it clearly shows that the submission was made, it gives you the date, it gives you the bank, etc. And then the next step, of course, would be to go and settle your liabilities as well. But it's not all about just submissions, it's also about retrieving anything that you've previously had. So HMRC are going to keep a record of everything that you have submitted historically, including payments made. So here, in this particular example, it's retrieving the information from your previous returns. So in the event you haven't kept a copy, it's okay, no problem at all. You can go to the HMRC site and retrieve that for any particular month or quarter. You do have to sign in again, that's inevitable. Again, it's all part of the controls. And then here, once you go to the HMRC site and retrieve it, you effectively see the values in an Excel format, okay? So all pretty standard, what return it is, what period it is, and the values that are available. Okay, and then lastly, but not least, why computerization? Why is it important when I've been doing paper returns or just tapping the numbers onto the website for many years?
Very good question. It's the direction of travel. You only have to look at what's happening across the rest of the EU to see where VAT compliance is going. So the UK has actually been quite late to the party. When we look what's happening in, say, Spain, within 4 days of issuing or receiving an invoice, the tax authority make you submit that data to them. And actually in Italy, from January this year, all invoicing is actually done electronically. So an e-invoice, paper is gone, and that invoice physically travels via the tax authority portal. So the tax authority actually know the transaction before your customer does. This is a trend, and we certainly see Making Tax Digital for VAT as the first step towards a wider requirement. So, not this year, not next year, but, in the next 3, 4, 5 years, I'm sure there'll be much broader requirements to be met. And that's why it's important now to start that journey, to start digitalizing the records, the links, improving the quality of the data, to not only meet these current requirements, but to put yourself in a good position for any future change.
So once we're late to the party in this particular sense, it's a good reason to be late for the party. I certainly wouldn't like to be in Spain doing my submissions every 4 days and then having an army of accountants doing that for me.
It's called fashionably late.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, so with that, I'll sort of hand over to my colleague Stefan.
Before I just want to say a big thank you to you both. That was some really great insight into what the initiative is, as well as the rationale behind it. Why the HMRC are doing it, and of course, the sort of meat of that was how us as charities can begin that journey and start taking those steps that we have to do to be compliant in the next few months. It's almost Q&A time. So I just want to bring light again to the fact, if you want to ask a question, you can do so by hitting the Q&A button you'll find on the lower tab there on your screen. Before we dive into that, I do want to hand over to Stefan to tell you a little bit about what Oracle NetSuite for Impact is all about, as a big hand in bringing today's webinar to you. So Stefan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris, and thank you, Kamlesh and Alex. Just to give a brief introduction of Oracle NetSuite Social Impact, our team is dedicated to helping charities and social enterprises grow their mission through the use of our technology. To support this program, we have 3 main pillars. As you can see on the screen, we have Suite Donation, where we actually provide software donations and discounts to non-profits of all sizes. We have Suite Pro Bono. This is where we match NetSuite employees with these charities to provide pro bono services, and Suite Capacity, providing continual capacity building activities within these organizations to help them accelerate their mission. We are proud to serve incredible organisations like Compassion in Wild Farming and AbilityNet, dedicated to building better communities. We want to spread this impact further through the causes that you all care about. So on behalf of Social Impact Team, we thank Charity Digital and thank you for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed the webinar and we look forward to answering your questions.
Thanks a lot, Stefan. So let's dive into questions then. We've got a few in so far, so we'll start at the beginning. How do I rectify errors or make adjustments after a return is submitted? Sorry.
So in terms of making adjustments, that will be depending on the nature of the adjustment, whether it can be put through on the next return, or whether a voluntary disclosure is made. So the way that the return is being filed is changing, but in terms of how you make changes, adjustments, that's under the normal rules.
And that limit, I think, is £2,500. If it's under it, then it can be added to the next return anyway, right?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the percentage of the error to the kind of net sales figure.
Oh, okay.
But we can share that afterwards. But I suppose you do want to make sure that the figures you're submitting are correct. You can't suddenly retrieve those, and you are under the existing penalty regime.
Yeah, so that's when you do retrieve submitted returns from the HMRC side, you cannot amend them. Yeah, just to emphasize that point again.
Thanks very much. Next question is, as I think we covered this actually already, is does the HMRC have a hotline for MTD queries? You did mention that briefly earlier. We can include that as we in a resource that we send out in the end as well.
Yes, and on a light-hearted note, don't forget they'll all be pretty busy with any changes they're making for Brexit too, right?
Yes. Next question is, what can I do if a submission fails?
Right, so this is where you would get an error message from the software that it has failed, and essentially you look for what the reason was. It could be that the values didn't add up, etc., and resubmit. But so long as you get an error message, it means it hasn't gone through all the way for submission. You can resubmit it.
Great, thanks very much. We mentioned a soft landing period of 12 months throughout the webinar. There's been a question, what does that exactly mean?
So the soft landing basically means the requirement around digital links, to have a digital link through your VAT compliance process from the digital records that you're required to have through to the actual preparation of that 9-box VAT return. You don't have to have those digital links until the soft landing in 2020. So it basically means HMRC will not penalise you. They will allow you to continue to copy and paste where required. So it gives you a bit of extra time to review your process and make those changes.
Yeah, so you did see reference to cut and paste not being allowed several times in the presentation. Again, just to emphasize, that is definitely the long-term goal for post-September 2020 for charities. But, whilst there'll be no penalties, just be careful that you try and get things in order as much as possible. But rest assured, there are no penalties that HMRC are going to be imposing during the soft landing period.
Thanks very much. For a question from Alex here, we are a new charity. What are the requirements for the first few months of business? When do we have to send our information to HMRC by?
So I suppose you're a new charity. I assume you're now VAT registered. So any VAT periods starting after the 1st of April, or if you're in the deferred category, from the 1st of October, those returns will have to be submitted via an API link to HMRC. So what you need to do, you need to make sure you signed up for Making Tax Digital with HMRC in time. so at least 5 working days before the submission date, and also obtain API-enabled software, bridging software, or have the functionality within your existing software to file that return via API.
And if they're a new charity but not registered for VAT, then of course none of this applies.
Yeah, I mean, the rules currently only apply to businesses mandatorily registered for VAT. So if you're registered on a voluntary basis, you can continue to file the historic way, or you can choose to transfer to MTD and file that way.
And we've come across many who have voluntarily registered for VAT because they need to reclaim it on purchases primarily.
Thanks a lot. Questions are coming in thick and fast, just taking a look here. There's so many software systems on the list. Do you have any examples of some which are free to charities? For example, if you're a bit of a smaller charity, don't necessarily have the resources.
I do understand there are some free software there. I suppose we have to stay relatively impartial on here. One, I suppose, partner of both of our organisations is a company called Avalara. You saw their logo because I think they provided some stats as part of the webcast. I understand they may have a free solution. It is worth checking online and it's just seeing what that entails. My own firm, Grant Thornton, we have a simple Excel add-in. It's not free, but it's a fairly reasonable price. So if you're interested in that, please do email me and I can demonstrate that to you.
What I would put to that as well is that keep in tune with what we write about in Charity Digital News. We'll be pushing a lot more content out in the coming months about the Making Tax Digital initiative. So, and one of those will be sort of evaluating the software space as well. So keep in touch with us on our website and keep visiting for that. So keep your eyes peeled. We'll have some more information on that. Next question: should I be considering software that also includes payroll? Right now, we outsource all of that as it requires expertise and additional money.
Yeah, and that question probably is arising from the fact that some charities may well outsource their payroll requirements. Basically, just give paper to agents that they do the payroll calculations and send the pay slips to every employee at the end of each month. So the answer to that is, you could do it in phases. It doesn't necessarily all have to be in one go. Payroll submissions are going to come much later on, so it's not the same time frames. You can do it piecemeal, which means that it also helps your budget, helps your pocket as well. But bear in mind that longer term, that's something that you will have to consider. But it need not be the same software.
Great, thanks a lot. And looks like this is our final question. What's the application process to Oracle NetSuite for charities, and what percentage of charity applications are accepted?
So there's no application process as such. If you want to find out more, you can visit our website, www.netsuite.co.uk/nonprofits, or pop me an email. My email address is stperez@netsuite.com. And I can forward you more information.
And just want to make one last point on that actually, Stefan, and this is because I'm passionate about it myself, that it's not just the software, but we also offer the consulting or the implementation as part of that too for charities. So it's not as if it will just be the software that we provide. We will actually do things, free of cost, if you like, for charities too. So there's lots of considerations there that would benefit charities.
Absolutely.
Great, thanks very much. Well, that's all about questions and all from us here at Charity Digital. Huge thank you once again to Kamlesh, Alex and Stefan, and of course all of you for joining us today. As I mentioned a little earlier, we'll be sending out a recording of this webinar in the next week or so. We did get some notes that people were having trouble hearing it. we apologise for that. We were trying to fix as it was ongoing, and we will try to rectify that in the recording. Along with that email, you'll get some additional resources that were talked about throughout the webinar, as well as the slides. You can also, the webinar will also be available on the Charity Digital News website, which is charitydigitalnews.co.uk. And you can go there and rewatch it anytime, and of course share with your colleagues in your networks. If you would like to get in touch with any of the speakers from today, or indeed myself, you can do so by following the email addresses on the screen now. Just before I let you go, if you'd be so kind, please don't forget to fill out the feedback form that we sent out right after the webinar. It's really short, it takes about 2 minutes, and does go a long way to helping us continuously improve up the service that we bring on a weekly basis. Unfortunately, we don't have any webinars scheduled for the next few weeks, but make sure you do go visit the website and visit our webinar page to engage with some of the past webinars. There's been some really insightful things from the likes of Lightful, Acquia, security-based stuff with NCSC, and the likes. So do go along and visit. I do also want to take this opportunity to mention that we have just finished recording a brand new podcast series. So the first one of those should be coming out in a few weeks, so please do keep your eyes peeled and keep an eye on your newsletters in the next few weeks. Brilliant. So thank you all again for coming, and we hope to see you soon.